In Greek philosophy, the concept of dialectic was a form of dialogue used to reveal truth through logical reasoning and critical examination. In the Republic, which is still widely regarded as one of the world's most influential works of philosophy and political theory, Plato describes the importance of the grooming of rulers or philosopher kings, a central tenet of which is the teaching of dialectic. According to Plato, no other science can be placed higher than dialectic, referring to dialectic as the coping stone of the sciences. Dialectic and dialectic alone, writes Plato, goes directly to the first principle and is the only science which does away with hypotheses in order to make her ground secure. But only those with disciplined minds and a strong foundation in earlier studies are ready to engage in dialectical reasoning. Young adults are typically introduced to it slowly, systematically, and cautiously, as they begin to see the connections and natural relationships between the different subjects which they have studied. Plato describes the risk inherent in teaching dialectical reasoning too early, describing the potential for youth to become reckless in application and behaving like puppy dogs, with a tendency to argue only for the sake of amusement. Without a comprehensive understanding of underlying principles, youth can lose respect for established norms and attempt to dismantle established beliefs without constructing anything in their place, potentially resulting in relativism and nihilism. Thus, dialectic, stripped of ethical and intellectual rigor, whether by youth or leaders with perverse incentives, can become a tool for ideological dogmatism, manipulation, and undermining of societal order. A recurring theme in Plato's works, and one that is particularly prominent in the Republic, is the idea that most people are lovers of sights and sounds, and seek only to form opinion, doxa, which is based on the sensory world, rather than true knowledge, episteme, which is based on critical thinking. This is why most people are trapped in Plato's cave, in a world of shadows or mere opinions, while philosophers ascend to the light of the sun, or true knowledge. But Plato's vision of educating philosopher kings was never realized during his life. Political leaders in ancient Greece were chosen based on wealth, birth, or popular support, not on intellectual training or philosophical merit. Rulers during Plato's time were generally skeptical of his philosophy, finding it either impractical or threatening to their power. Plato's attempts to engage with political authority were largely unsuccessful and underscored the gap between philosophical ideals and the realities of governance. Plato did mentor Dionysius II of Syracuse, but this experiment failed as Dionysius, accustomed to the privileges of tyranny, showed insufficient interest in the rigorous education needed to become a philosopher king. Nor has Plato's vision of educating philosopher kings been realized since his time, which seems odd, considering the time that has passed, that Plato is still widely considered to be one of the most influential philosophers in history, and that the Republic remains one of the most studied works in political philosophy. Though the purpose of medieval education increasingly became one of training clergy and scholars to interpret religious texts and engaging in intellectual debate, education continued to be organized around the classical system and the 7 liberal arts. The first stage, the trivium, consisted of grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. The second stage, the quadrivium, consisted of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. While Plato reserved dialectic as the culmination of a philosophical education to be used as a tool for accessing ultimate truths and understanding just governance, the medieval system made it a foundational subject for everyday logical reasoning, thus suitable for younger students. Similarly, secular Renaissance humanists used the trivium and quadrivium to aid in studying classical texts, but dialectic was de-emphasized in favor of grammar and rhetoric, which were seen as more practical and important for civic engagement and effective, persuasive speaking and writing. During the Enlightenment period, and particularly for the German idealists, dialectic was seen in a much broader context, as the very mechanism by which change occurs and history unfolds. In this context, dialectic involves tension between two opposing ideas, and then eventually some sort of synthesis or reconciliation of them. Dialectical movement was seen as the very process of becoming, the very process of history in which something incorporates its other into itself and a new element appears over and over again. Each stage in the historical process contains the seeds of its own destruction, but also a new potential. Influenced by the German idealists, and particularly Hegel, Marx and Engels articulated yet another adaptation of dialectic, which held that history is dialectical, but is driven primarily by material conditions, especially the modes of production, inevitably progressing through stages, from feudalism to capitalism, socialism, and eventually communism, due to these material realities. While Marx and Engels did not use the term dialectical materialism themselves, this term has been widely used by scholars to describe this conception. The term was later popularized by Marxist theorists like Georgy Plekhanov and institutionalized by Vladimir Lenin and others in Soviet Marxism. Critics of dialectical materialism, like Karl Popper, one of the 20th century's most influential philosophers of science, maintain that the deterministic nature of this application of dialectic lends itself to would-be authoritarian leaders, as it was used to justify authoritarianism and the suppression of dissent in both Germany and Russia. In 1945, in his seminal work, The Open Society and Its Enemies, Popper maintains that a free and open society uses ethics, science, and rationalism to make decisions, and should never look at outcomes as inevitable or preordained. In the book, Popper also makes an important distinction between utopian social engineering and piecemeal social engineering. The latter, according to Popper, was not a bad thing, and only involved incremental, small-scale changes to address specific societal issues. The former, on the other hand, involved overly ambitious, totalizing efforts to overhaul society as a whole, and tended to lead to authoritarianism and the suppression of dissent in the name of achieving the greater good. Popper's critique resonates with Plato's warning that dialectic, stripped of ethical and intellectual rigor, can become a tool for ideological dogmatism, manipulation, and undermining of societal order. In his essay, Conjectures and Refutations, Popper states, "The whole development of dialectic should be a warning against the dangers inherent in philosophical system building. It should remind us that philosophy must not be made a basis for any sort of scientific system, and that philosophers should be much more modest in their claims." In Marx's view, it is the main task of sociological science to show how these dialectic forces are working in history, and thus to prophesy the course of history. Along with the industrial economy came the need for mass education in the 19th and 20th centuries, narrowing the focus of education to more basic skills like the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Classical education, centered around the 7 liberal arts, continued primarily in more advanced, specialized settings, such as private academies. It's clear that leaders today still see dialectic as a powerful tool. But, like Dionysius II, today's leaders are accustomed to the privileges of tyranny and have little interest in the rigorous education needed to become philosopher kings themselves. Far from Plato's conception of a means to acquiring true knowledge through critical thinking, modern leaders have weaponized dialectic in mass media to stir up emotions, ensuring the majority remain trapped in Plato's cave as lovers of sights and sounds, who have no shortage of emotionally centered opinions but little knowledge. In the cave, we don't bother asking how 2 people as highly influential as Adam Smith and Karl Marx could possibly have such different ideas. We simply choose one and mock the other, as we have been taught to do. Like so many things, conservative and progressive sensibilities are distributed normally and are well represented by a bell curve, which means most of us are middling and have a lot in common. Whether we lean to the right or left of center, most of us are not that far apart. But such solidarity in the body politic is seen as threatening by social elites and their status quo. So this solidarity is made to look insignificant or even non-existent in the mass media, by depicting something more akin to an upside-down bell curve. Instead of what we would expect, which is a large group in the middle comprised of people who have a lot in common, the media falsely depicts 2 tribes piled up in the margins with diametrically opposing beliefs, where each group believes the other is stark raving mad, which of course ought to bring the age-old dictum of divide and conquer clearly into focus. The The more polarization the media generates, the more citizenry tend to be lovers of sights and sounds, as in Plato's cave, where the majority form only opinions rather than seeking true knowledge and critical thinking. Today, citizenry, on either side of the aisle, don't support any given narrative because they really believe it in a logical sense. They support it because the media has successfully convinced them that their tribe believes it. And thus, true to Plato's warning, dialectic, stripped of ethical and intellectual rigor, has become a tool for ideological dogmatism, manipulation, tyranny, and undermining of societal order, resulting in the rise of relativism, one of the most prominent features of the modern political discourse, and one which has effectively forbade engaging in dialectic and questioning thoughts and ideas which clearly do not serve the greater good.
This, to me, is the clue to understanding something that is personally fascinating, and it revolves around why people believe such weird things. There is no longer a commonality of understanding. I mean, for some people, quantum physics provides the answers. Their next-door neighbor may look to the channeling of archangels with equal fervor. And so into that dimension of anxiety created by this inability to parse reality rushes a bewildering variety of squirrely notions. Epistemological cartoons. It's the live and let live, laid-back approach to doing intellectual heavy lifting. I have to defer. It allows stuff like Heaven's Gate. It allows Jonestown. Nobody ever said to those people, "You're full of shit. You know, don't think like this. This will lead to catastrophe." Instead, people said, "Hey, cool. You know, see you in the sky." And people say, "Well, but now this sounds like you're advocating acrimonious and emotionally painful judgment-making that will leave some of us disenfranchised from our belief in the space people or the presence of great Atlantis or something else that's very cherished." Yes. Yes. We have loosened our girdings sufficiently, folks. We are now open-minded enough. You don't want to become so open-minded that the wind can whistle between your ears. We have been taught that political correctness demands that we treat all these things with equal weight. The enemy that will really subvert the enterprise of building a world based on clarity is the belief that we cannot point out the pernicious forms of idiocy that flourish in our own community. And to me, all of these things are intelligence tests. And the people who pass the intelligence test are not worrying about pro bono proctologists from other star systems showing unannounced in their bedrooms. So, you know, we have perfected politeness. Now I think it's time to refine our mathematical skills, learn to think straight, and not be afraid to denounce the pernicious forms of foolishness which are vitiating the energies of our community and making us appear marginal and absurd in the discourse about truly transforming society.